Hello everybody. Today we're going to talk about Elder Scrolls game lore, how you get into it and the traps. And my own experiences whilst learning all this lore that I used in my various mods. Now, this is more of a story than a lesson, so bear with me. Back in the early days, 2006, when I played my first Elder Scrolls game, Oblivion, I was making Kvatch Aftermath. Now I waited for Kvatch Rebuild to be made, and after a couple of months when there was no sign of it, I thought I'll do it myself. And it took me about a month and a half just to get the first version out, and I was immediately attacked for making a lore unfriendly mod, mostly by Kvatch fans that wanted an arena. Now the thing is, Kvatch had an arena, then it was burnt down. The ultimate test of the lore is it still burnt down? No, then it's not yet lore friendly. So I knew this because I'm not an idiot, and I understood that they wanted an arena, but to call it lore friendly or lore was a little bit of a stretch given the fact the whole city was now a burning ruin. So anyhow, I just ignored them. But it got worse. And eventually I thought, okay, I'm going to read up on the lore, I'm going to study up on it, and I started my second mod, Origin of the Mages Guild. Now in Origin of the Mages Guild, I decided I would join one of the lore forums, and I was in there, I was asking a ton of questions about Daedra, about Mages Guild, everything. And there was a guy called B on the forum who helped me a lot. He basically said to me, he says, you've got to learn it yourself and understand it yourself. It's interpretation, you see. This is the point he's making. You interpret the law yourself when you read it. And you come to different conclusions than the guy next to you. Now, if he interprets it and then he tells me and I interpret what he said, then it's like Chinese whispers. You end up with something very different. So anyhow, I listened to him and I took what he said on board and I started interpreting the law in different ways. And of course, the more you learn about the law, the less you know. That's just the way it is. And when you eventually get to a point where you know enough to make a mod like Origin of the Mages Guild, you're so focused on that one mod that you just don't see the big picture. This led up to the Necromancer mod, where I looked at just the Necromancer thing and just made a mod focused on that as well. And I did the background story to that. And suddenly I've got two parts of Elder Scrolls game lore right there in front of me. The Elder Scrolls, version of the Mages Guild and, the Necromancers. Now it starts making sense to me at this point. And I start asking myself, is Daedric summoning? What's involved? How do people react? And I learned in Cyrodiil, people didn't like, people summoning Daedric creatures in the streets. It was actually considered a taboo. And you had various quests in Oblivion about just doing that. And how they kept it secret and closed behind closed doors. So that became an element of the Mages Guild mod when I did further updates. So all these little side quests started building up. Eventually, I worked around to making another Kvatch mod. Now, the second Kvatch mod I made says it was strictly lore friendly. But when I started making that, I understood at that point the problem with listening to people on the forum. The people on the forum say wanted an arena, they wanted this, they wanted that. It was law to them, but it wasn't law. I call this forum law. It was their version of saying, or their way of saying, I want this, and if I call it law, I've got more of a chance of getting it. Anyhow, in the end, I just started saying to them, prove it. If it's law, prove it. Show me a book or something in game that proves what you're saying is law. And they all shut up. Every single one of them. They all shut up. And I continued studying this law. And I eventually learned quite a lot. I learned about the Dwemer, I learned about the elves and the humans, and I learned the ultimate point of the game lore in the Elder Scrolls. It's man versus elf. That's the whole lore right there. Man versus elf. Two different stories. The elven version and the man's version. And once you learn the law and you understand there's a man's version of the law and there's an elven version of the law, and they contradict each other, and you start understanding Lorcan and how Lorcan the trickster is seen by one side and loved by the other, and how all the battles around that, especially around the Skyrim and Morrowind law, start interacting. then you start seeing things like the Dragonborn in the New Light. You start understanding that many of these early chosen people, of Akintosh, or some of the Nordic versions of the pantheon, were involved in these battles and were actually Dragonborn too, but they were emperors. And then suddenly Tiber Septim, why was he an emperor? All Dragonborns never became emperor, but he was. But suddenly, in order to be on the throne, you had to be Dragonborn. So that means you didn't have to be a Septim to be on the throne. Or on the throne, you could be anything, like the Romans and other things. See, because there's a long line of emperors, and they were all Septims. See, so you start learning about this. You start learning how each dynasty, basically started and ended. You start understanding this is Dragonborn, this is Dragonborn, this is Dragonborn, but they aren't related. And then it just leads on. You're building up layers upon layers upon layers. In the end, when I made a return to Helgen mod, and I actually looked at all of this and I pieced it all together, and I started thinking, how would you kill an emperor and not be seen as a criminal? In Dark Brotherhood, just use the Dark Brotherhood quest. It says, how would you choose an emperor? Well, Dragonborn would be good. He could claim he's a descendant of the Septims or anything else, or the Romans or anything, because he would have that authority as a Dragonborn to be able to say, yes, I'm the rightful emperor. It's a bit like, changing history to make yourself sound like you're an offspring of some distant king, so you will be chosen as the next king. It's that kind of thing. It fits in the real world and it fits in the fantasy world. And this involves me knowing a little bit about the lore, knowing how it works, knowing how Bethesda tend to change the story from one angle to another based on what they're trying to achieve. And remember, it all boils down to elves versus man. All of it. I mean, admittedly, if you get down to Black Marsh, it probably would be different. Because down there, I would guess there isn't many elves, there isn't many men, it's just, it's Argonians. Lots and lots of Argonians in the Hist. So that's why the Hist and the Argonian law is probably the one that fascinates me the most right now, because it's a dark swamp with many mysteries and you could do anything in there. Anything at all. Anyway, the whole idea of the law is something you build up to. You don't just read a book and you know it. You build up to it. You learn it as you go. In that way, you slowly get better and better and better. But the more you know, the more you understand. The less you know, the less you understand. It's just one of those things about life where the process of educating yourself leaves you with a surefire knowledge that you've still got a lot to learn. And if you actually are trying to learn the Elder Scrolls lore, just understand it's a journey. Don't try and rush it to the end. Explore every aspect you find interesting. Usually in-game is best. Explore it in-game where the information is fresh and current. And if you have to read a book, remember, or go on a site like the Wiki, remember they're interpreting the lore already. So you might not get a clear picture of what the law actually says by reading a web page. You might have to go back into a game and see it in the game to understand the context, because a page on the web doesn't give you the context in the game. And that's the biggest tip I can give you right there. Anyway, lore is a journey, and it's about elves and it's about humans, and from there it all branches out into different directions. And once you understand that, you'll start understanding the broad strokes of Elder Scrolls lore. See you in the next one.